On the bottom of Yud Chesam with Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara here is bringing a few different memres from Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar. That's how this all began. Zok the Gemara, V'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, Niskala la Bavel. So Bavel, which of course destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash, so they were cursed. Niskal l'shchenel. The neighbors around Bavel were cursed as well. As Rashi brings, we know Oile Rasha, Oile Shchenai. Whatever a Rasha experiences, the Shchenim, the neighbors also get affected by it. Shomrain, Niskal la Shomrain in Eretz Yisrael, during the times of the Melucha of Shlomo Melech, or after that actually, when the Melucha of Eretz Yisrael was split from Malchus David and Malchus Yehuda and Malchus Yisrael, and then the Yidden of Malchus Yisrael were serving Avodah Zarah, and they eventually were expelled from Eretz Yisrael much earlier than the rest of Klal Yisrael. And Shomrain got cursed in the sense of that it emptied out. But Nisbarcha Shchenah, the Yidden that remained there from Shevet Yehuda, they got benched. And the Gemara brings the sources for this. Skala Bavel, Niskal Shchenah, Bavel is cursed, and the neighbors are cursed as well. The Chsiv, it says regarding Bavel, V'samtia l'moirish kipud v'agmei mayim. And I'll make that area for a place of kipud. Kipud is a name of some kind of a bird, that the birds will inherit that area. V'agmei mayim, and it'll become just puddles of water. And the animals that will be there in that area. So this pasuk is talking not only about Bavel, but it's talking about that whole area B'chlal. So here we see that the whole area was cursed. Niskal lo Shomrain is Baruch Shchenah when Shomrain is cursed. So the other Yidden that are the neighbors, they get benched. The Chsiv is Samti Shomrain li'iyasada. What happened when those Yidden that were there left? So that whole area became into beautiful fields that they were able to plant. L'matoi karem, and they were able to plant it as vineyards. So Adarabah, the Yidden that remained in Eretz Yisrael benefited from this area. V'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, Boyer come and see Shaloi Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu Midas Basav Adam. The Eibishter's Midas are not like it is by a human being here below. Midas Basav Adam, it comes below over here in this world by a king. Mischayev Adam Harigel Malchos. If a person is chayev, has been punished with execution by a king, Matilun lechakel otechpiv, they place a, whatever a chak is called, you have the exact translation, there's something they place into his mouth in order that to close his mouth, or that he shouldn't be able to speak. A piece of wood into his mouth, that the person shouldn't be able to say anything. So he doesn't curse the king. And the point is, the person always feels like that what's being done to him is unjust. Or he feels like it's just a melech basav adam. I can open my mouth and say whatever I want, nothing's going to happen to me. But Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes to the Eibishter, it's a different story. Adam is chayiv hariga l'makayim. A person that is chayiv hariga, and it's the Eibishter, it's Torah that brings him this verdict. Shaisik, the person is quiet and accepts it. He knows that it's coming from the Eibishter, and therefore it's just. And he knows that. And another point is, he knows he better keep his mouth shut, because whatever he says, he'll be judged upon that as well. Shanema, the pasuk says, L'cha dumia tehillah. That for you, when the Eibishter does something to a person, so the person dumia means remain quiet, and tehillah means he praises the Eibishter. V'lo yoid, so the Gemara explains, it says dumia and tehillah. So not only is the person quiet, but v'lo yoid el shemeshabeach, he praises the Eibishter. Shanema tehillah. The word tehillah means that you praise the Eibishter. V'lo yoid el shadoy meloi ki'ilu makriv karban. When this happens to a person, this kind of a punishment, he treats it as if he's bringing a carbon. Shanama or lacha yishulam neder. The pasuk there continues and says, and to you I give a neder of a carbon. So the point of it here is, of course this is the way it should be. When a person has something that comes upon him in life, which is a einish from the Eibishter, so the response of a person should be that he should realize that it's coming from a source, that it's being done justly. The Eibishter is doing it in a way that that's what he deserves, and that's the best for the person. So therefore the person should accept it. B'simcha. Tanya of Laskil Chabina. That's what you're referring to, correct. Haine Dam Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Same point Rabbi Shua ben Levi said. My dechsiv. So the pasuk says, Oivrei be'emek habocha mayin yishisuhu. These are different lashonos that are talking about a person that's getting punished, as the Gemara will explain in a moment. Gam broches yate moira. And yet at the same time, the person is saying brachas, he's thanking the Eibishter. So what are we talking about over here? Who is this referring to? Oivrei, Eilu ben Yadam she'oivrim al Ritzainish shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oivrei is people that were over on the Eibishter's will. Emek is people that are in a deep place. Shema mikelem gehenim. That the Eibusher has a deep place for them in the Gehenim. Habacha, what does the word habacha mean? Shebaychin umeridin demois, that they cry and they have tears coming down their face. Kemayon shel shitten, like the mayon, like the holes that there are in the Mizbeach that go all the way down to the Tahaim. That's how deep and low down this Gehenim is. Yata Meire, what does Yata Meire mean? Shematzdikin alein esadin, that they justify the judgment of the Eibusher, va'oimrim lefanav, and they say to the Eibusher, the Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe, Yafeh Danta, you've judged me beautifully. Yafeh Zachisa, Yafeh Chiyafta. When you're mezaka a person, when you say that a person is exempt, so then it's also beautiful and right. And if otherwise, if I'm found to be guilty, it's also right. V'yafeh tikanta gehenim l'rishayim, and it's beautiful this that you set up that there's a gehenim for the rishayim and a gan eden l'tzadikim and a gan eden for tzadikim. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that the right approach, and when the Eibusher does something for a person, that the person sees that it's coming from the Eibusher, which is doing everything yafeh. All these times, yafeh, yafeh, yafeh. The person sees everything is being done for a good purpose. Fragt the Gemara, is this the case, that when a person gets judged and punished by the Eibusher, and he comes into Gehenim, still the person can have this attitude, and he's thanking the Eibusher for this? Eini v'ha'omer Rab Shimon ben Lakish, Rishayim afil al pischei shel Gehenim. The Rishayim, even when they come to the door, to the gates of Gehenim, and they see the punishment that they're going to get, einam chayzerim b'tshuva. Yet they don't do tshuva even at that point. Shanema v'yetzu v'yatzu, that is v'yatzu v'ro b'pigrei ha'anashim ha'paishim bi. So it's talking about pigrei ha'anashim, a person once he passes away and he comes into Gehenim. HaPaishim bi, so it uses the term Paishim bi. The Gemara says Shepashu leinema. It doesn't describe them as people, as Rishaim, that have sinned in the past. Ela HaPaishim, Shepaishim v'ohelchem lo'elam. They continue to sin even after they come up l'mayla. They still sin. So how can we say that they're matzdikim aleim esadin? Over here it says that the Rishaim, when they come to Gehenim, they still are continuing to sin. And it says the Gemara loikashya. It's not a question. Ha b'paisha Yisrael, ha b'paisha evdei kechavim. Before, what we were describing, that a person realizes that the Eibusher is giving him whatever happens to him, and he thanks the Eibusher for it, is talking about Paisha Yisrael. By Paisha Evdei Kechavim, when they come to even to the opening of Gehenim, they're still continuing to sin. And the Gemara brings a source for this. Let me just mention an interesting thing I saw yesterday in the Ritva on this Gemara. So he says there's two kinds of Gehenim. There's Gehenim Shal Eish and Gehenim Shal Sheleg. So he says that a person is thrown first into Gehenim Shal Sheleg, and then he knows that from there he's going to be going to Gehenim Shalesh. So when he's leaving Gehenim Shal Sheleg, he's taking along with himself some snow in order to cool down the Gehenim Shalesh that he's going to go into. Some medrash. And the Eibusher looks at him and says, Nish genug, that here in this world you were stealing that's not yours. You're going from Gehenim Shal Sheleg to Gehenim Shalesh, and you're pocketing some snow to go into Gehenim Shalesh. Okay, that's a medrash. Not to touch what this medrash means, but the concept, the idea that even Lamaila, the neshama is still incomplete, and it continues to fail, and then it says by Paisha Evdei Kechavim. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Hachanami mistavra. This distinction that we just made over here between Paisha Yisrael and Paisha Evdei Kechavim makes sense to say. The Imkain, if not, Kashi the Rish Lakish the Rish Lakish, there would be a contradiction from another statement that Rish Lakish said. What did Rish Lakish say in another place? The Amar Rish Lakish, Paisha Yisrael ein or Gehenim shaletas behen. Even Paisha Yisrael, the fire of Gehenim cannot control, cannot...
Rish Lakish is about Shuvah, no?
Again?
Rish Lakish is about Shuvah?
Yes, correct. He's talking, he relates to this, he's saying, yeah. So right, correct. The Oir of Gehenim cannot have control over them. And what's the source of this? Kal v'chaymer mizbeach hazav, and the kal v'chaymer is from the mizbeach hazav in the Beis Hamikdash. Ma mizbeach hazav. So the mizbeach hazav, which was made out of wood, and it had a thin layer of gold that covered it. She'ein olav ela ka'oivi dinner zav. It had a thin layer of gold, which was only as thick as a coin of a dinner, that covered it. Nevertheless, and there was a fire there all the time for the ketaitis. Amad kam ashanim v'leisholtu b'ya'oir. And it was there many years and it didn't burn it. Some say it didn't burn the actual gold. Some say it didn't burn the wood that's under the gold. Either way, the fire didn't affect it. So if that's b'negei tam mizbeach, Paisha Yisrael shemelei mitzvahs kerimein. So Paisha Yisrael that are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate, shenema kepelach harimay rekosich. Which means that they're empty, even those empty ones. They're really full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. Most definitely, the fire of Gehenna will not be shaylat in them. So the point the Gemara is saying is that we see over here that Reish Lakish is saying that these Paishi Yisrael, by the time they come to Gehenna, the fire of Gehenna is not going to have any effect on them. So it's logical to say that this fits with what we said before, because when they come to the doors of Gehenna, they're thanking the Eibishter, they're doing tshuva, and they're appreciating what the Eibishter is doing to them, and therefore the Gehenna does not have any shlita on them. There's the famous question, of course, that is asked, and it's actually asked already by all the Mefarshim, but the Kli Yakar asks this question, ala Teira, that if they're called, if they are, no, the question is fakert. If they're Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim, why are they called Paishi Yisrael? They're Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim. How could you call them Paishi Yisrael? So there's a lot of different pshatim to this. The Kli Yakar's pshat, which fits mostly here in the pshat of the Gemara, is that Anachanami, we're talking about Bali Tshuva. They were Paishi Yisrael, but as we said, at a certain point they do tshuva. At least at the very last point, when they get to the gate of Gehenna, they do tshuva. And mitzad that, it brings up the Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim that's inside of them, because when you do tshuva, it's ma'apach all the zdainis tezachiyas. That's the pshat of the Kli Yakar. The Alter Rebbe says, and look at it in Teira Eir, and the Rebbe brings this in a few sichos, that when the Gemara here speaks about Paishi Yisrael that are Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim, what it means is, it's talking about a person that's mekayim a lot of mitzvahs, but doesn't learn Teira. There's a very big difference the way Teira affects a person and the way mitzvahs affects a person. When a person learns Teira, it enters into the person, you process it, you digest it, and it makes a mapech in the person himself. When a person does mitzvahs are actions. They're external, l'fiyarech. So you do an action, you do chesed, whatever it is, any mitzvah a person does, it doesn't change the mahus of the person. So on one hand, the person can be identified as a Paishi Yisrael, that's who he is, but at the same time, his Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim can be doing a lot of mitzvahs. But if without Teira, it doesn't make a transformation in the person b'pnimius. That's who the Gemara is talking about over here. That's the Alter Rebbe's pshat.
There's a famous story with another Rebbe.
There's someone that came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him to say over something that he from his Rebbe, and he said that his Rebbe asked a shaila that if we're talking over here about people that are Paishi Yisrael, so how could they be Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim? They're Paishi Yisrael. So the Rebbe says, ich have the selbe shaila, but I have the shaila fakert. That if they're Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim, why are you calling them Paishi Yisrael? They're Malay Mitzvahs Kerimayim. The perspective of how you look at a Yid. Yeah, sagt die Gemara weiter. Is what? Yeah, no. It's here and the Gemara and end of Chagiga, those two places.
I think it's in the Gemara.
End of Chagiga. Sagt die Gemara, Ela hadich seif. So now, what's the pasuk? We quoted before a pasuk. It says, Oivre be'emek habacha. So it says that they go into emek habacha. What does this mean? If we're saying now that they do tshuva, or that the oil of Gehenna doesn't have any shlita in them, so what is this Oivre be'emek habacha? Says the Gemara, Hahu the mechayvi ahi shaita beGehenna. What that means is that they become, the verdict is that they're guilty and they have to go into Gehenna. And then, but what happens is, V'asi Avram Avinu umasikluhu. Avram Avinu comes and pulls them out of Gehenna. Umekabeluhu. And he takes them, he receives them. Besides one exception. Bar mi Yisrael shal Baal bas oivde kechavim. Besides a Yid that had a relation with a guy, the mashcha arlasai, so his arla has been pulled in a way that his mila is not noticeable. There's two pshatim in Mefarshim about this, whether it means because of the Aveda, it's considered as if he has no bris, but he physically does. Or others say that it means physically, that he alters it in a way that the bris shouldn't be noticeable. And v'lei mevashkerle. So Avraham Avinu does not recognize him as a Yid, and he can't pull him out of Gehenna. But otherwise, even a Yid that deserves Gehenna, he goes there, but Avraham Avinu comes and pulls him out. Maskef lo Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana asks a question. Ha shteda omrit hapoishim. So you're saying over here that when it says hapoishim, so the meaning of hapoishim means presently. And the goyim, so even when they come mamish into Gehenna itself, they still continue to sin. The pashiv ozli, they continue to sin. So ela mayata. If so, the chsiv hamaitzi. When we say hamaitzi es chameretz Mitzrayim, the Eibusher takes you out of Mitzrayim. Or it says hamayla es chameretz Mitzrayim. These are also written in the same present term. Does that mean the masagu, the mafke? Does that mean that the Eibusher takes you out of Mitzrayim now? It doesn't. L'chayre, there's no Yitzias Mitzrayim right now. Elo the asik va'apik, or even though it's written in the present term, but nevertheless it means in the past that the Eibusher took you out of Mitzrayim. So hachanami the pashihu. So over here as well, when it says ha-paishim, it doesn't mean that they're sinning presently. It means the ones that sinned in the past, and we're calling them now paishim, but even though they're not sinning anymore. So therefore he disagrees to the whole point that we said before, that there are those that come to the doors of Gehenna, or even in Gehenna itself, and they're still sinning. It doesn't mean presently. It means in the past. Correct. So then l'chayr is shayla is not a shayla. Okay, and l'chanami. Zok the Gemara of Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar shloisha psachim yesh leGehenim. There are 3 entrances to Gehenim. Echad b'midbar, one is in the midbar, ve'echad b'yam, and one is in the yam, ve'echad b'Yerushalayim, and one is in Yerushalayim, which is of course in a city, in a place where people live. So there's a lot of different mefarshim that explain what these 3 psachim of Gehenim are. And b'chlal, the world is the Mashah says that the world is divided into 3 kinds of places. There's the places where people live, there's the places that are midbariyos, deserts, which is a huge part of the world, and then there's the yam, the water. So it's keneged these 3 places that you have the 3 entrances. There's other pshatim, the Chassam Sofer says it's keneged the kinna, taiva, and kovid, which is metzianis adam and oilam. Kinna separates people from each other like a midbar. Taiva is in Mokim Yishuv, where there's the place of the Taiva, and the Yam, where you have the ocean and the waves that make a lot of waves. That's a person that looks for covet and makes a lot of waves around himself. So those are the 3 psachim of Gehenim. By Midbar, so in a desert, we see that there's an entrance. Tichsiv vayerdu haim v'chola shalahem chayim she'oila bayom. That they go down chayim she'oila. She'oil is a term used for Gehenim in the Yam. No, again, I'm not reading this right. But again, Bayam is a second thing. Again, by Midbar. Here we're bringing the source for the Midbar. And this is what it says by Kairach, by the people who got swallowed in the ground. And that was in the Midbar, of course. So that's the entrance for Gehenim in the Midbar. Bayam dichsiv mi beten sha'oil shivati shamata koili. And this is a pasuk that it says by Yoina, when he was down in the depths of the ocean, in the stomach of the fish. So he calls from the Eibishter mi beten sha'oil. He refers to the place that he's in as sha'oil. And as we'll see soon, sha'oil is one of the names of Gehenim. Yerushalayim d'chsiv nu'um Hashem asher oir loy b'tzion v'taner loy b'Yerushalayim. There's fire in Zion and there's a oven in Yerushalayim. What is this fire and oven? V'taner de Rabbi Shmuel. Asher oir loy b'tzion is the Gehenim. V'taner loy b'Yerushalayim zu pischa shel Gehenim. This is the entrance of Gehenim, which is in Yerushalayim. So these are the 3 entrances. There's only these 3 entrances. There's more. Amr Marian, Amr Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amr la Taner Rabbi Bar Marian, B'debei Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai, Shtei Timrois, Tmarois Yesh, Begei ben Hinoim. There are 2 palm trees in a guy, which means literally a valley, Ben Hinoim, name of a place. V'oila Hashem b'bneiim, and the smoke that comes out between these trees. And that's an opening for Gehenna. And V'zui Sheshaninu, this is a Mishnah in Sukkah that says, Tzine Hara Barzel Ksheires, that there's a palm tree that has a different kind of lulav than a regular lulav tree. The leaves of this lulav do not reach one another properly. They're shorter leaves. It's because it comes from this place where the opening of Gehenna is, so the palm trees there, it doesn't grow properly. And that's another opening for Gehenna. So this question is, V'zui Pischa Shegehenna. Another opening, a 4th place l'chayra. So the Gemara answers, no, not necessarily. Dilma Haini Yerushalayim. That's that place, Taka. That's the opening of Yerushalayim. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Zayin Shemis Yesh LeGehenna. True, but I guess within the Yerushalayim Gufa, there's higher places and lower places. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Zayin Shemis Yesh LeGehenna. There are 7 names for Gehenna, and one of them actually is not Gehenna. 7 names besides Gehenna, as the Gemara will explain there. Ve'elohein, Sha'oil, Va'avadim, Be'er Shachas, Uboir, Sha'oin, V'tit, Hayovin, V'tzalmoves. And the Gemara brings from Psukim, and Ve'eretz HaTachtes. Okay, so what is the source for all these 7 names? And the 7 names is different also. Mefarshim speak about what these 7 names are about. Keneged the 7 days of Kriya, 7 days of the week. There's all kinds of pshatim with this. But each one of these names hints to another level of Gehenna, another aspect of Gehenna. So the Psukim, the Gemara brings as follows. Sha'oil d'chsiv, as we brought before already, mi beten sha'oil shivaiti shamata kaili. So you see the term sha'oil. Avadoin d'chsiv hayesupa ba'keva chasdecha munoscha ba'avadoin. So the term avadim there is used regarding Gehenna. Be'er shachas tichsev ki leisazev nafshi l'sha'oil leisitin chasitcha lirois shachas. U'barishoin v'titayovin tichsev v'yaleni mi barishoin mi titayovin. Also, all these psukim talking about the punishment of Gehenna. Tzal mavis tichsev yoshvei chayshach v'tzal mavis. Eretz atachtis, there's no source for this in a pasuk, Gemarahu. It's a tradition that we know that Gehenna is called Eretz atachtis, the land under. The world, whatever, the underworld, or the below. Frekte Gemara, Visu leke, there are only these 7 names, V'ha'ike Gehenim. How about the name Gehenim itself? That's another name, that's an 8th name. So the Gemara says, the name Gehenim is not a name, it's more of a description. It's a nickname or a description of Gehenim. Gei means she'amuka be-Gehenim. It's a deep place. What does this mean? She'hakel yerden la al iske hinam. All people that go there, the reason they're going there is because of iske hinam. What does iske, or the Bach actually says, iske chinam. What does iske chinam mean? A person that occupies himself with things that are pointless, foolish things. Rashi says this refers to the Aveira of Arayas. So gay, it's a deep place of people that were Isaac in hinam or chinam. So it's only a description, it's not an actual name. There's another name, Tafta. We find the name Tafta, we're in a pasuk. It says it's called the Chsiv, Ki Aruch Me Esmael Tafta. And it's talking about Gehenim. So the Gemara says that's also only a description of something. It's not a name. Hahu Shekola Mespata Beyitzroi, a person that becomes persuaded by the Yetzer Hara, Yipolsham. He falls into Gehenim, but it's not an actual name. Okay, we're done with Gehenim. So now the Gemara turns to Gan Eden a little bit. Sagt the Gemara, Gan Eden, Amar Ish Lakish. So the opening of Gan Eden in Eretz Yisrael, who, if the entrance to Gan Eden is in Eretz Yisrael, Beis Shan, Pischai. The name of the place of its opening is in Beis Shan, and Rashi says Beis Shan was a place where the fruits over there were very, very sweet, and that's an indication that that's the opening for Gan Eden. Vim Ba'Arabia, if it's in an Arabia, in an Arabian country, Beis Gram Pischai. The place of the opening is Beis Gram, again a place where there's a lot of very sweet fruits. V'im Bin Naharesu, and if it's in Bin Nahares, another place, Hu Dumskimin Pischai. So the opening is Dumskimin, which also has very sweet fruits. Bebavel, if it, in Bavel, Abaye Mishtabach Beperi, the Mavri Yemina, Abaye would say that the fruits in Bavel, where's the best fruits in Bavel? Mavri Yemina. Go to the right side of the Pros, that's what Rashi explains. You cross over the river of Pros on the south, and there you'll have the best fruits, because that's also the place where there's the opening of Gan Eden. Rave Mishtabach Beperi de Harpanya. Rave says it's a place called Harpanya, which had the best fruits, and that's the opening of Gan Eden. Okay? So we're done now with the Gemara B'negeh to Gan Eden and Gehenim. The Gemara comes back to Eiruvin, the land back into the Sugya of Eiruvin. What did we have in the Mishnah? Ubeneim kimoloi shtei chulus, or it said in the Mishnah that we're putting up partitions in the corners around a well to be able to turn it into a Reshus HaYachid. And where are those partitions put up? In the corners. And the Mishnah said that it's in order for animals to be able to go through, and they're tied together. So the lashon of the Mishnah was kshurais. What's the lashon again of the Mishnah? Kshurais v'loy mutaris, tied together and not untied. Frekta Gemara pshita. The Mishnah seems to be saying a lashon which is obvious. If you say that they're tied, they're obviously not untied. Why does the Mishnah have to add v'loy mutaris? Kivin the taneloi kshurais. If it says that they're tied, ha'avu ananya dinon de le'avu mutaris. I know that they're not untied. So the Gemara answers, no, not necessarily. Mao the time kshurais. When I say the term kshurais, I would say maybe it means ke'en kshurais, that they're entering close enough, like they're tied together, but they're not tied together. Avol mamish loy, literally tied together, they're not. Kamash malon v'loy mutaris. I mean kshurais v'loy mutaris, that they're tied together in one yoke, and that's how these behemoths are entering.
What's the svara behind it?
Why would I say the difference? So the difference is, the Mefarshim say that it's going to be change the measurement, obviously. Right? There's a machlekes in the Mishnah if the measurement is 10 amas or 13 and a third amas. If the kshurais, but they're not really kshurais, so then there's a little bit more space, and then you have to measure wider amas, bigger amas. We had before, every am is made up of six tfachim, but it depends how you count the tfachim. Wider tfachim, less tfachim. So the point the Mishnah is saying is it has to be smaller tfachim, exactly 10 amas, or 13 and a third amas, and not large or not spread out. Then it said achas nechnases v'achas yaitzes. So you have the groups of the cows that are going in. One is actually going in and one is coming out. Tana revake nechnases v'revake yaitzes. One is entering and one is coming out. In other words, we're not talking about one cow entering and one cow coming out, but we're talking about the groups of cows, one group entering and one group coming out. Tana Rabbanon. So we learned in the Braise, Kama Reisha v'ruba shel para. So another thing that it said in our Mishnah, the Gemara here is going to go through now all the measurements of the points that it said in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah itself, it did not say any actual measurements. Right? It said the measurements regarding the boards, but it didn't say any measurements when you get to the space that there could be between these boards that you put up in the corner. It just said that it's the size of either two groups of 3 cows, 2 groups of 4 cows, and then it said Reisha v'ruba, that it has to be, the boards have to be away from the well, Reisha v'ruba, that most of the body of the cow could enter into that space, but it didn't give you the actual measurements. So here this Braisa gives you the measurements. Tana Rabbanan Kama Reisha v'ruba shel para. What is most of the body of the cow? Shtei amas, 2 amas. The kama oivya shel para. What's the thickness of the body of the para? Since we're counting over here the thickness of the bodies in order to know how much could enter. Amma ushnei shlishe amma. An amma and 2/3 of an amma. That's how thick each body is. Now shehein ke'eser divrei Rab Meir. So if you have 6 cows that are entering in groups, so 6 times 1 and 2/3 is 10. So it's ke'eser. It's 10. It says ke'eser, which the Gemara will explain, but it's 10. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kishloish esra'ama u'ka'arbe esra'ama. It's about 13 amas or about 14 amas. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's 2 groups of 4 that are entering. So the Gemara is going to explain what's the pshat that we're using over here. Ke'eser or kishloish esra and ke'arbe esra'ama. What is it supposed to mean? Frag the Gemara, ke'eser, according to Rabbi Meir, it's like about 10. In other words, it's not exactly 10, it's less than 10. Ha'esavin, it's exactly 10. 6 times 1 and 2/3 is 10. So why are we saying ke'eser? Answers the Gemara, Mishum debayla misni seifa kishloish esra. Because in the seifa he uses the term kishloish esra, so therefore in the reisha he also uses the term ke'eser. Frag the Gemara, wait a minute, but that itself doesn't make sense. Kishloish esra? Why in the seifa does it say that it's about shloish esra? Which is sort of mashma that it's less than that. It's not tvei avyin, it's actually more, it's 13 and a third. And for the Gemara, Mishum debayla misni ke'arbe esra, because he wanted to say ke'arbe esra, that it's less than 14. Frag the Gemara, o ke'arbe esra halehavya. So, but why is he saying ke'arbe esra? It's not about 14, it's only 13 and a third, which is a lot less than 14. So that lashon doesn't make sense either. So bottom line is, ke'eser, it's only using this term because of the lashon of kishloish esra. And then you're telling me it's using the term kishloish esra because it wants to say ka'arbe esra, but that term also doesn't make sense. So what's the pshat over here? Amar Rav Papa, yiseirais al shloish esra, ve'enan magiyas la'arba esra. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's more than 13, but it's less than 14. So the way to read what Rabbi Yehuda was saying is, it's one statement, it's not 2 separate things. Kishloish esra'ame u ka'arbe esra'ame. Meaning to say, it's somewhere between 13 and 14. And because he used that term in the Sefer, so Rab Meir also said ke'eser, even though it's exactly 10 amas according to Rab Meir.
If you're already using that many words, why don't they just say 13 and third?
Okay.
I can understand if you want to be mekatzer.
I hear you, but it's already, it's adarab, it's being mairich. Okay, good to Shaila. Zok the Gemara, Amar Rav Papa. So now Rav Papa says as follows. What's the space you're allowed to have here? So if you remember, it said in the Mishnah that there's another machlokes here between Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Whether it's enough to have those double partitions at the corners, the L-shaped partitions at the corners, that's what Rabbi Yehuda held. And Rab Meir says, no, you have to have, besides the ones at the corners, you have to also have another partition, another space, in the middle of each side, you have to have another partition. So the Gemara is going to explain exactly when that machlokes is. Amar Rav Papa, b'bayir shmeina. So if you have a well which is 8 amas wide, pretty big well, or 8 amas wide. the kula alma loy pligi, nobody's going to argue the loy be'inon pshutim, that it's not necessary to have additional boards in the middle besides the boards in the corner. What's the cheshbon? So the point of the cheshbon over here is, you have the 8 amas of the well, so you have a distance of 8 amas that these corners are covering. And then, what did we say? How far, what's the minimum that the boards that are on the corners could be close to the well? What did we just say? 2 amas, because Reisha Viruba of a pot is 2 amas. So add 2 amas on one side, 2 amas on the other side, so you get 12. But then each one of the boards has to be an amma. So take off an amma on this side, an amma on this side. So now you have a space of 10 amas in between the partitions in the corners. When you have only a space of 10 amas, it's fine. 10 amas is the maximum, and you don't have to have any additional boards, even according to Rab Meir. So no one would argue that just putting up in the corners would be fine. That's if it's shmeina. Where are we? 1 second. On the other hand, if you have a boyer that is 12 amas big, in that case, nobody will argue that you are going to need to have additional boards to make up for the space that's too open. Why? So again, you have the boyer itself, it's 12 amas, and then the partitions which are 2 amas away on each side. So that's 16 amas, and then each board has an amma that it comes in, so that's 14 amas. So you have a space of 14 amas, which is more than 13 and a third. So you have too much space. You're going to have to put a board in the middle to minimize that space. Nobody would argue that you have to minimize the space. Ki pligi, when is the argument? Mishmayna achtei mesra, in that space in between. Okay, from more than 10 amas and less than 13 and a third. That space in between. So, li Rab Yehuda loy binam pshutim. Rab Yehuda says that even though up to that space you don't need any additional boards in between, it's okay. And Rab Meir says no. Once it's an opening that's more than 10 amas, you have to have additional boards in between. So that's where the machlokes is. So again, the point is 10 amas and less. Everybody agrees that just having the boards in the corner is fine. More than 13 amas and a third, everybody agrees you have to have an additional partition in the middle to minimize the space. In between 10 and 13 amas and a third, that's where the machlokes is, if you have to have additional boards in between. Frek the Gemara. What's going on over here? Rav Papa Maika Mashmalon. Rav Papa is giving us the basic measurements over here that we know based on what we just learned in the Braisa. So Maika Mashmalon, what is he teaching us? Tanina, this is basically what we learned in the Braisa. If you look at the measurements that the Braisa says, you should be able to figure this out on your own. And it says the Gemara, Rav Papa Braisa Lishmiele. Rav Papa didn't know the Braisa, he didn't hear this Braisa. But Kamashmalon Kibraisa, he's explaining Pshat in the Mishnah like what it says in the Braisa. Okay, now the Gemara will continue here with a bunch of different shilas regarding this halacha, and the Gemara brings a siman as a reminder of what all these shilas are about. Arich, Yaiser, Betel, Chitzis, Chotzer, Sheyavsha, siman. This is a siman of all the shilas the Gemara is going to ask now. Abai asked the question from Rabbe, Herich b'diyumdin kishir pshutin l'Rab Meir maho. So what happens if a person has the diyumdin? What are the diyumdin? They are the partitions in the corners, the double partitions in the corners. So what did we say according to Rab Meir? Usually, if there's too much space, what do you have to do? You have to add another board in the middle on each side. But what if the person didn't add another board in the middle? He just made the partitions in the corner a little bit, he extended them a little bit longer. Usually the partitions in the corner only have to be an amma on each side. He extended it, 2 amas, 3 amas, whatever amount is necessary, right? Instead of putting it in the middle. So is that going to be okay or not? So Rashi explains, why shouldn't it be good? What's the problem? So the answer is, when you put another partition in the middle, there's a bigger hecker. It's there, stands alone, and you notice it more. If you just add another part to the board in the corners, so you don't notice it as much. So the question is whether that's going to work or not. Amalei, so the answer, Rabbi said, is Tanisua. Isn't this what we learned in the Mishnah? The lashon of our Mishnah was a bulvad sheyarbe bepasin. That if you have too much opening, so you have to add boards. My love, don't you think that lashon means the mayrich b'diyumdin? That it doesn't mean that you put a board in the middle, but you add another board to the corners. So the Gemara says, loy, that's not what it means. The mafish for ovid pshutin. What it means is that he's actually adding another board in the middle, not adding to the corners. That's what the Yarbe Bepassen means. So the Gemara says, no, it's not precise in the wording of the Mishnah. If he's adding another board in the middle, the Mishnah says that you should add to the boards, that base doesn't belong there. Yarbe Bipassen, what does that mean, Yarbe Bipassen? It means that you already have boards there and you're adding another board to those boards. You're extending it. That's what it's mashma, the word bipassen. When you say the word passen without a base, it's mashma put another separate board. So it's mashma that you're not extending the corners. So therefore the Gemara says it's not mashma so in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Tani achiyar bepassen. Okay, so the Gemara says lav dafke. This lashon of the extra base, it's not so meduyik. You could learn in the Mishnah that it means yarbe passen, that you're adding extra boards, and it's not a hemshech to the corners. Iked Amri, others say that no, the Gemara is being medayik in this base, and it's precise. Amalei, the answer that Rabbi said is tenisua. We learned in the Mishnah ubulvat sheyarbe bepassen. You have to add passen. What does this mean? My love, the mafish va'ovid pshutin. Don't you think this means that he's not extending the boards in the corners? He's adding other boards in the middle. And the Gemara answers, Loi, the mairich b'diyumdin. He's not adding extra boards in the middle, he's extending the corners. And hachanami mistavre, this is what it's mashma in the lashon of the Mishnah, midiktani ubulvat sheyarbe bipassen. Bipassen is mashma that he's extending the existing corners that are there already. Shma mina, and this is a raya. This was one question. When you get to how you have to add boards, could you extend the corners, or do you add another board in the middle? Another shayla was at another shayla by asked from Rabbi. If the space, the opening, is more than 13 amos and a third, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so now you have to close it off. It's too wide of an opening. So how do you close it off? Rab Meir in our Mishnah speaks about closing it off, but Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah doesn't speak about it. So how do you do it? Pshutin of it? Do you add another board in the middle? Or you add an extender in the corners, like we mentioned before, that you can extend the corners and not put a board in the middle. Which one do you do? Amalei, so he answered him, Tenisua. This as well we can see from a Braisa. What does it say in a Braisa? Kamehein mekurovin. So the Braisa over here says, how close do these partitions have to be to the actual well itself? Kidei roisha v'ruba shel para. Not less than that most of the body of the cow should be able to be inside of these partitions. How far could it be? Afilu kurayim. It could be very far. Even the space of a kur and kurayim, which is a massive territory, even that far. Rabbi Yehuda says no. When you make these partitions around the well, it can't be that far. Beis hasayim mutter. If it's Beis hasayim, which is 100 by 50 yamas, that's allowed. Yaisami beis hasayim, but more than that, asr. That's already not allowed. Amru Leila Rabbi Yehuda, so they said to Rabbi Yehuda, why are you giving this measurement? Iyat do you not agree, bidir, in a barn, visar, an open place that's designated for animals, or muktzah, a lot, which is also designated to keeping things there, chotzer, a front yard, afilu bas chameshes kurim, afilu bas asora kurim shemutter, even if you have such a large space, it's still allowed. There's no limitation on how large a Rishus HaYachid could be, other than a case where you're not living there. But in a case where you're living there, it can be as large as you want. So why shouldn't we say the same thing over here regarding the well? So what is Rabbi Yehuda answer to this? Omar lehen, Rabbi Yehuda answers them, Zu mechitza, you're bringing me a source that you could make the space as large as you want from a case where you have a mechitza. But ve'elu passen. Over here, I'm talking about just boards that you're putting up on the corners, or just single boards that you're putting up around. It's much different. It's not as good as a regular mechitza. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Ve'im isa, if it's true, if you're going to tell me that according to Rabbi Yehuda, how do you put up these boards? And if the space between the boards in the corners is too large, what do you do to minimize that space? You add boards to the corner. You just extend the boards in the corner that it should minimize the space. If that's true, so then zu mechitza and v'zu mechitza mi bayalei. So just like a mechitza beneged to a courtyard, the mechitza that we're talking about beneged to a regular reshus yachid, you have a real mechitza. Over here, beneged to a well, you also basically have a regular mechitza. Think about it. Yeah, it could be, it's not parchment of Alamed, correct. But if you have a boir or a be'er, and then you have a mechitza around it, and it's a massive territory that you're putting up the mechitza, and you're only putting them up in the corners, but you can't have a space between one mechitza and another mechitza more than 13 and a third amas, and this is a massive territory, so in the corners you're extending a massive mechitza with a very big length, and you're only having a little space of an opening of 13 and a third amas. So you basically have a full mechitza here. So why is Rabbi Yehuda saying that you're talking about a mechitza and I'm talking about pasim, which is just boards? They're not single boards. You're extending the whole mechitza from the corners to be a full mechitza. Elamai, it's mashma from here that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't extend the mechitza from the corners to make it one long mechitza. You just put up single boards. Anytime the space is too much of an opening, you put up single boards in the middle. So therefore he calls it pasim. So this is a raya that you don't extend the walls from the corners. So the Gemara answers not necessarily. Hachi ka'amar. This is what he meant to say. Zu teiras mechitza alel. You're talking about a case where it has the halacha of a mechitza. What's the halacha of a mechitza? Upirtzeisel be'eser. By a mechitza of a reshus yachid, usually the maximum opening that it could have is 10 amas. And ve'elu teiras pasan alein. Over here, we're talking about something that has a different halacha. The halacha of pasan upirtzeisein b'shlosh esr amos shlish. And the Chacham were lenient and they allow you to have an opening of 13 and a third amas. So true, in both cases, they're very similar. They're a long mechitza that you're building. But as far as the halacha that we apply, over here it's much more lenient. It's a different kind of halacha. So therefore you can't bring a raya from that case. That's what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. Another case. Abai asked another question from Rabbi. Teil hamislaket asara mitoich. So you have a little mound. And this mound is 10 tvachim high, which is the height you have to have for any mechitza, and it reaches that height within 4 amas. If you reach that height very gradually and it's not within 4 amas, so then that height doesn't matter. But it reaches that height within 4 amas. So the question is, this kind of a little mound, could I use this nidin mishum de yumid? Could I use this as one of those partitions in the corner? Or nidin mishum de yumid? I can't use it as a partition. Amalei tenisua. We learned this in a brayser. Rab Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Ha'isa sham even. What if you have a rock in one of the corners, mirubas, and it's square? So could I rely on this square rock in one of the corners? So the answer is royan. We have to see kol she'ilu tichalik v'yesh ba amalakan v'amalakan nid mishum diyumad. If you take this rock and you would take away the space of the full square rock, and you will have that right space that you need of an amma on one side and an amma on another side, so then it's fine. Otherwise, you can't use it as a diyumid. Rabbi Shmuel ben Yochanan ben Breika Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika, says, Im ha'isasham even agula. You have a rock that's not square, but it's round. Royin kol she'ilu techakek v'techalek. You have to do 2 things. You have to square it out, it has to be square, and you also have to carve it out, that it should be like a diyumid, which is L-shaped. So the only thing that works for the corners is, it can't be round, it can't be square, it has to be carved out to be L-shaped. So v'yesh ba'amalakan v'amalakan, and it would still have an amma on each side, nidin mishum diyumid. This will be counted as a partition that can be used in the corner. Then otherwise it can't be used as a diyumad. You want to see the picture? Correct. That's what I mean. But okay, so yeah, take a look over here in the corner. The pictures over here. You can see picture Kufayin Vav, where you have the Teila Maslaket Mitoich Arba. You can take a look at picture Kufayin Zayin. So you see you have a square in one corner, and you consider it as if it's been carved out. And then you have the corner. So you have to consider it as if it's squared out, and after squared out, it's also carved out to be L-shaped. It's an interesting thing. I mean, the Mefarshim asked the question, who cares if it's actually carved out or not? But Payil, you have that partition there. It has that same measurement, whether it is carved out, whether it's not carved out. It's a very big shayla here in the Gemara. But Payil, that's what the Gemara says, that the partitions in the corner have to actually be L-shaped.
If it comes to the shus itself, like a Kabbalist,
what?
Maybe that's the problem.
What?
It's square.
Okay, but we're not talking about it itself. We're talking about the effect that it has in the space inside. How does it affect the space inside? And the only way it could be useful for the space inside is if it's squared out and carved out. Okay, so the Gemara now... Yeah, as if. Correct. Consider it as if.
Right, so what's the question?
Why do we have to consider it as if? Just leave it as is, round or square, and it's a good partition.
It's a means of knowing whether it's good enough.
No, but the Gemara wouldn't use the term Ryan though. The Gemara would just say, measure it, the square. Just measure both sides of the square and see if it has an am on each side. What's the Ryan? Especially according to what the Gemara says now. Take a look. The Gemara explains what's the machlokes over here between Rab Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broike. He was talking about a square and he's talking about round. What's the difference? So the Gemara explains, B'mai kamifligi, what are they arguing about? Mar savar, so Rab Shimon ben Elazar holds, Chad royan amrinon, to say that I consider it as if it's carved out, that I could do. But trei royan lo amrinon, I have to consider it as if it's squared out, from round to square, and then from square to L-shaped, so far I don't go. Omar savar, and Bishmol says, afilu trei royan nami amrinon. Two royan I also say. So basically the Gemara is saying the same thing will apply to a little mound, that it depends if it's a round mound or if it's a square round, so it's going to be dependent on this machlokes whether you consider it as if it's rounded out or not. Okay.